Good morning. Welcome to Chalice Unitarian Universalist Congregation. We are a community of diverse beliefs and experiences, nurturing the liberal religious spirit and united by our desire to grow in love and in service. Whoever you are, whomever you love, whatever your life's journey, you are welcome here. Whether you gather with us every Sunday, once or twice a year, or are with us this morning for the first time, we are glad you are here. I'm Reverend Sharon Wiley, Chalice's minister. Our worship musician this morning is Justin Gray. Welcome to this online worship service. Welcome to those of you watching live using Zoom, and welcome to those of you who are watching the recording of this service later on our YouTube channel. For those of us using Zoom this morning, please notice on your menu, there's a button that says CC Live Transcript. That is our Zoom's closed captioning service. You can click on it to hide the subtitle or show the subtitle. If you want that function on or off, you control that. Also on your menu is the chat button. For those of you who like to use the chat during the service, we are welcome to do that. And please be sure that when you post that you've used that little blue drop-down menu to select panelists and attendees. If you only post to panelists, I'm the only one who has the ability to see it and might miss what you wanted to share during the service. So we want to use the chat to share for everybody. So let's all give ourselves a big hug of hello and welcome. Good morning. I want to especially welcome those of you who are newcomers at Chalice. Towards the end of the service, there will be a link in the chat box for adding your name to our email list. Our weekly email is the best way to get information about the many online groups and activities we are offering using Zoom. And once you're on our email list, you will also get information about our monthly gathering for newcomers. So now let's take a breath together.
We acknowledge that our service is taking place on the stolen territory of the Kumeyaay, meaning humans or people, and the Payamkawishim, meaning Western people. A land acknowledgement works to undo the intentional erasure of Indigenous people and to support the resilience and strength that all Indigenous people have shown. We acknowledge the original inhabitants as a first and critical step toward learning and working with Indigenous communities to secure meaningful partnership and inclusion in the stewardship and protection of their cultural resources and sacred homeland.
Now we light our chalice, the symbol of our Unitarian Universalist faith. The flaming chalice was first used during World War II by the Unitarian Service Committee as a symbol of life-saving refuge for people fleeing persecution in Europe. May our chalice flame burn brightly, that all who are seeking may find us. The words of our call to worship come from the Reverend Cynthia Landrum. Spirit of life and love, we gather together this morning from computer screens, from telephones, from car radios. We gather reaching out across the wires, waving from a safe distance to come together in religious community. From living room to front porch to car seat, we gather as we are able, ready to be of service to each other, to the world, ready to build the community of hope and of love as we face this bright morning. We are apart, but we are together, offering our love, our commitment, our hope, and our prayers in service to one another and this world. It is a new way, but an old way, that we come together in worship today. Please join in singing.
Morning has broken like the first morning. Blackbird has spoken like the first bird. Praise for the singing, praise for the morning, praise for them springing fresh from the word. Sweet the rain's new fall, sunlit from heaven, like the first dew fall on the first grass. Praise for the sweetness of the wet garden, sprung in completeness where his feet pass. Mine is the sunlight, mine is the morning, born of the one light, Eden saw play. Praise with elation, praise every morning, God's recreation of the new
Our Sunday worship is the shared spiritual practice of our community, and we tend to the congregation during this time by honoring our joys and sorrows. If you would like to share a joy or sorrow with the congregation this morning, now is the time for sharing in the chat box. These won't be spoken out loud. If you would like to send me a confidential note about your joy or sorrow, please email me and I'll put my email address in the chat box. Such is peace. Such is peace. Such is spirit. Such is spirit. Such is love. Such is love. All this joy. All this joy. All this sorrow. All this sorrow. All this promise. All this pain. All this pain. Such is love. Such is love. Such is peace. Such is peace. Such is peace. Such is peace. Such is love. Such is love. All this joy. All this joy. All this sorrow. All this sorrow. All this promise. All this pain. All this pain. Such is love. Such is love. Such is peace. Such is peace. Such is peace. Such is peace. Such is love. Such is love. All this joy. All this joy. All this sorrow. All this sorrow. All this promise. All this pain. All this pain. Such is love. Such is love. Such is peace. Such is peace. Such is peace. Such is peace. Such is love. Such is love.
This is the ancient Persian story of the Simurgh, originally told in the 12th century by Fariduddin Attar and retold by Jorge Luis Borges in the Book of Imaginary Things. The Simurgh is a benevolent, mythical, flying creature, an immortal bird that nests in the branches of the tree of knowledge, far away in a distant land. One day, the other birds learn that the Simurgh has dropped one of his splendid feathers. These birds have been living in anarchy and they are tired of it, tired of chaos, struggle, and confusion. They know there must be a better way, and they need the wisdom and guidance of a great leader. So, they decide to venture off to find the Simurgh. They know that this journey will be long and difficult, since the great benevolent bird's castle lies way out in a distant mountain range that forms a ring around the earth. But it's got to be worth the journey to find deliverance from the chaos that surrounds them. A better world must be possible. So this group of birds heads off to see the Simurgh, and right away many of the birds lose heart. The nightingale bails. He can't bear to be apart from his beloved rose. The parrot wants to go right back into the cage in which he's lived his whole life. The partridge cannot do without the comfort of her home in the hills. The heron can't stand being away from the marsh, nor the owl away from his ruins. But finally, certain of them set out on the perilous venture. They cross 7 valleys, 7 seas, each one with an alarming name. The next to last sea was named Bewilderment, and the last one, Annihilation. Many of the original pilgrims desert. The journey takes a deep toll on the rest of the travelers. They are exhausted, depleted, and at the end of this arduous journey, only 30 birds are left. These birds were frightened and tired, but they kept moving together, and they finally reached the great peak that the great Simurgh bird is said to live upon. and the birds land. They prepare to behold their king, to receive their answers, to rest into the end of chaos. But there on that mountain peak, there is no great mythical bird. It's just them on that peak, just 30 birds. And this is because they are the Simurgh. Because it turns out that the word Simurgh means 30 birds. And the Simurgh is each of them and all of them together.
How to explain white supremacy to a white supremacist. Sometimes you are a lit match dropped into a boiling ocean. Sometimes you are a stray dog, proud of the sunrise after a long night of barking at the moon. Sometimes you scream at the television, shadowbox mushroom clouds, your hand-to-hand hatred outclassed, outdated. You, post-apocalyptic litter bug. You, venomous spider in the basement of a burning building. You, whose anger is so vast and so empty. All teeth and no mouth, no jaw muscles, just that white rattle. Remember, white supremacy is not a shark, it's the water. It is how we talk about racism as white hoods and Confederate flags, knowing that you own those things and we don't. As if we didn't own this history too, this system. We tread water and you chum in a bucket. How many skinheads do you think are in the room when they set immigration law? Or decide curriculum for public schools, or push policies like redlining, mandatory minimum sentencing, benign neglect, gentrification, broken windows policing, voter ID, stop and frisk, 3 strikes, the drug war. Remember, the eye of the hurricane is the least destructive part. You, meanest glare in the chat room, all poker face and no cards. Was it your politically incorrect YouTube comment that made the median net worth of black families in this country 9% the median net worth of white families? Which individual Donald Trump bigot boogeyman are we supposed to be angry at about the millions of people impacted by discrimination in housing and banking and education and employment and the criminal justice system each year? Remember, sharks kill about 1 person each year. Thousands drowned. So, when there is a new name hashtagged each week, when police create more black stars than Hollywood, how long do we keep pointing out the bad apples, ignoring the fact that the orchard was planted on a mass grave? And that we planted it there. Because, of course, this isn't really a poem for white supremacists, right? Like, I don't know any white supremacists, but I know a lot of people in my neighborhood and in my family, and I know myself, and I know how white supremacy is upheld, whether through our action, our inaction, or just through paying our tuition and taxes. How it isn't just the broken treaty, it is also the treaty. How a gavel can speak as loudly as a grenade. How a white frat boy in blackface on Halloween and his friend, who knows it's wrong but doesn't say anything, begin to blur together. How the real racists today are very often not even racist. Those teeth sharper when smiling, sharper still when smiling and meaning it. A burning cross is so dramatic. Just say, I don't see race. Just say, we all have an equal chance if we just work hard. Just say, all lives matter. Just say nothing. Surround yourself with others who say nothing and convince yourself that silence is the only song, this muted underwater melody, this pulsing quiet. And when a chorus blooms in Baltimore, when trumpets sound in Ferguson, in Minneapolis, when every one of our cities breaks into song, will we hear it? Will we choose to listen? Or will we just continue treading water, watching for that great white shark, not realizing that we're drowning?
Each church year, I pick a topic for a 10-part sermon series for us to study deeply together. We call this our spirit study topic for the year. And this year, we're working with a book called My Grandmother's Hands, Racialized Trauma and the Pathway to Mending Our Hearts and Bodies, written by trauma specialist Resmaa Menakem. Today is the 8th sermon in this series, and you can find my earlier sermons in this series on our YouTube channel. There's so much in this book that gives language to things we've experienced ourselves or observed in the world, but haven't necessarily had good understanding of. One of Menakem's key ideas we've talked about a lot is that when it comes to trauma, we have what he calls clean pain and dirty pain. Clean pain are the experiences we have that we've processed and learned from. We've metabolized them in his language. Dirty pain is pain that has not been faced and healed. Dirty pain that goes unhealed and unaddressed in an individual can start to look like personality. So we've seen this in the world, right? People who seem perpetually angry, volatile, unself-aware. Menakem writes, the paths of avoidance, blame, and denial are paved with dirty pain. When people respond from their most wounded parts and choose dirty pain, they only create more of it, or both for themselves and for other people, end quote. And dirty pain that goes unresolved over generations begins, he says, to look a lot like culture. We have a lot of unmetabolized pain in the United States from our history of slavery and other forms of racism. And that's one way of understanding some of the culture wars we seem to be in. Like, what is the connection between white supremacy and people who won't wear their masks? This feels like a weird connection, right? But they're the same, they're the same people. There's something there about racism and unprocessed pain. And the expressions of that unprocessed pain are denial, blame, emotional immaturity, things like that. One of the ways that white people keep ourselves from metabolizing the pain of racism, we keep ourselves from doing the work of facing and processing the pain of racism in this country, is that many of us live in a bubble. We talked about the bubble after the 2016 election, when we talked about the bubble then, we were creating an idea of how we could not have known how many people would be attracted and vitalized by Donald Trump's messages. I think the bubbles are a little different than we thought they were then. Many of us live in a bubble where we don't know the full history of racism in this country. And we don't know the full realities of racism that's happening now. We were surprised, many of us, by the popularity of Trump and his winning the presidency. And we tend even still to think of racism as an aberration instead of a norm. We think of it as something extraordinary that only happens in unusual circumstances, when all evidence shows that racism happens everywhere, all of the time. So this is one of the reasons I like to bring pieces like the poem we just heard, How to Explain White Supremacy to a White Supremacist by the poet Guante, to our worship, to help us stop hiding from hearing and knowing how people of color routinely experience racism. It's not the shark, it's the water. It is possible to be white in the United States and to live under the delusion that racism is rare. And when white people do that, we keep ourselves from processing the pain, from healing the trauma, and so we contribute to and perpetuate the unhealed pain. When white people deny or minimize that racism exists, what we do then is we segregate ourselves from people of color whose lived reality is that racism does exist. Because how can people of color connect to and build relationships with other people who deny the existence of racism? So we think we aren't racist, but everything we are doing perpetuates that disconnection between white people and people of color and keeps white people from recognizing and affirming that people of color are the authorities of what is happening in their own lives. So another key idea from Menakem is that settled bodies help other bodies settle. He uses the word settle in the same way that I would say grounded and centered. And a lot of the book is about how we can cultivate settled bodies in ourselves so our settled bodies can help settle other bodies. When he writes about how to settle the body, he writes about all the things we would expect and have been talking about so much during this pandemic: getting enough sleep, eating well, drinking water, getting some exercise, savoring simple pleasures, cultivating a daily spiritual practice. He recommends 20 to 40 minutes of spiritual practice every day. Menakem writes, gather together a large group of unsettled bodies, or assemble a group of bodies and then unsettle them, and you get a mob or a riot. He goes on, but bring a large group of settled bodies together, and you have a potential movement and potential force for tremendous good in the world. A calm, settled body is the foundation for health, for healing, for helping others, and for changing the world. End quote. So this might sound a little nebulous, but if you think about it, you've probably experienced what he's talking about. If you've ever been around someone who is unsettled, especially in public space, someone who's pacing, talking out loud to themselves, someone who's moving erratically, being near someone like that is unsettling, and most of us seek to move away. And then similarly, when we're around someone who is calm and steady, it helps us feel calm and steady too. So then Menakem takes this idea that bodies influence other bodies, and he takes it another step. He tells us that bodies have the potential to harmonize with each other. So he writes, I've discussed how a settled body helps other bodies it encounters to settle as well. Give bodies the right context and encouragement, and they will begin to harmonize as well. When, over time, enough bodies heal from historical, intergenerational, and personal trauma and learn to harmonize, that harmony can turn into a culture of resilience and flow. End quote. So how bodies harmonize, according to Menakem, is through group practices like singing, humming, rocking back and forth together, line dancing, sitting in silence together, breathing together. All this is information we've covered in previous sermons in this series. Why I've gone over those ideas quickly. But today we take the next step in this thinking about how bodies interact and influence each other. And we bring that thinking to social activism, to justice work. Years ago, I used to think that the point of things like marches and protests was solely to effect change. And that if the march or protest wasn't making a specific demand, wasn't clear in what it was setting out to accomplish, then it wasn't really worthwhile, I thought. I thought that effectiveness was the best measure of a social action. Was it effective in bringing about change? And I changed my mind about that way of thinking after the Women's March in January 2017. Thousands of women in San Diego participated in that march, including a busload of us from Chalice, and millions of women around the country and around the world. And what it accomplished was that it heartened us. It strengthened us. It restored faltering spirits. And I think Resmaa Menakem would say that in many ways, our bodies harmonized at that march. So this helps articulate why it feels so good to walk and sing together or to chant together. Our bodies harmonize when we do that, and it brings healing to those of us who are participating, and it helps build community, a sense of community. Community is important, and this is my idea now, not Resmaa Menakem. Community is important because, one of the reasons, because it's an antidote to white supremacy. Not the only antidote, but one of them. White supremacy is all about individualism, building community, multiracial, multicultural, mutually supportive, loving community is an act of resistance to white supremacy. So Menakem writes his hopes for why he's writing the book, his hopes for the future. Ideally, America will grow up and out of white body supremacy. Americans will begin healing their long-held trauma around race, and whiteness will begin to evolve from race to culture, and then to community. Again, whiteness will begin to evolve from race to culture, and then to community. So perhaps marching and protesting are best understood as acts of community building. And perhaps we understand right now better than we ever could have before how important it is to bring bodies together, physically together, into shared space for shared activity. We feel the absence of that. Menakem writes, at its best, activism is a form of healing. It is about what we do and how we show up in the world. It is about learning and expressing regard, compassion, and love. End quote. Every day, if you look for it, there is news of important changes happening. Police reform is not happening as quickly as we would wish if we could wave a wand and make things different, but changes are happening. And it is because activists are working hard, working together to effect change. So the next time you have a safe opportunity to participate in justice work, I invite you to think of that opportunity as a source of healing to you, and to embrace it with the understanding that working together with other people to change the world is about expressing regard, compassion, and love. You're invited to join in singing.
Soon the day will arrive when we will be together, and no longer will we live in fear. And the children will smile without wondering whether on that day thunder clouds will appear. Wait and see what a world there can be if we share, if we care, you and me. Wait and see what a world there can be if we share, if we care, you and me. Some have dreamed, some have died to make a bright tomorrow, and our vision remains in our hearts. Now the torch must be passed with new hope, not in sorrow, and a promise to make a new start. Wait and see what a world there can be if we share, if we care, you and me. Wait and see what a world there can be if we share, if we care, you and me.
The Sunday offering is an expression of the generosity that makes congregational life possible. As Buddhist teacher Christina Feldman writes, generosity lies at the heart of spiritual practice. Extending generosity to ourselves and to others gladdens our heart, is a direct way of healing division, and brings joy. Please text your donation to Chalice. If you haven't texted a donation before, know that once you text the numbers, the amount, you'll get a reply with a link to follow to enter your credit card information. And if you've already entered this information previously when you've donated, you won't need to enter it again. If your Sunday donation is part of your pledge payment, please be sure to indicate the word pledge after the dollar amount. And also know that you can make a text donation anytime. It doesn't need to be only during the worship service. So the phone number will be on screen in a moment, and I'll also put it in the chat box. I hope you will give generously. Please join in dedicating our offering with words of affirmation. May love be the spirit of this church. May the quest for truth be its sacrament and service be its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, and to help one another in fellowship. This is our aspiration.
So you say this is human, your heartbeat versus mine. I'm in chains 'cause I'm choosing, showing love, a living life. I shouldn't have to leave where I stand, I shouldn't have to change who I am to count as a human. Oh, feel my pulse. With your hand on my heart, you know it beats just as hard as yours. Feel my pulse. Oh, feel my pulse. Can't you see that I'm scarred? I'm just the same as you are, so just feel my pulse. Oh, I wish I could reach them and strip away what separates. Oh, it's the same air we're breathing, the same tears run down our face. So I don't have to leave where I stand, and I don't have to change who I am to count as a human. Oh, feel my pulse. With your hand on my heart, you know it beats just as hard as yours. Feel my pulse. Oh, feel my pulse. Can't you see that I'm scarred? I'm just the same as you are, so just feel my pulse. Oh, oh. Can't you see that I'm scarred? I'm just the same as you are, so just feel my pulse. Oh, feel my pulse. Can't you see that we're human? Pulse.
I hope you've had a chance to read my message in the April newsletter. In it, I share the thoughts of coordinating team about a timeline for resuming in-person worship, which will be in addition to continuing our online worship. So we're thinking that we will be slow and cautious about returning to in-person worship. And we're hoping that things will continue to go well and that we can gather together again in September. So that might sound like a long ways away when Governor Newsom has announced his hopes that California will reopen fully on June 15th. So I don't want to repeat everything that I wrote in that message. I hope you'll take time to read it. But the main thing I want to lift up today is this, that when we gather together in person again, I want it to be joyful and celebratory, not something that adds to our anxiety and distress. We have been and still are living with anxiety and distress, and we don't need more. So this is just like the beginning of the pandemic again, when there is so much that we don't know, and it will just take time to learn. Last year, we were learning about the virus, and now we are learning about the vaccines and about the virus variants. And we're also continuing to learn about long haul COVID, which also takes time. San Diego County reports that 24% of San Diegans 16 years and older are fully vaccinated now. This is wonderful news. CDC guidelines say that vaccinated Americans should continue to wear a mask in public at all times and to avoid medium and large-sized in-person gatherings. And you can check out the CDC website. They have very specific ideas about what, how to figure out if a gathering is safe, like how many households vaccinated people can gather together. But if it's another household with an unvaccinated person, they have a little chart to help you think about that. As someone who has received a first dose, I can tell you that it is wonderful to feel less terrified of being out in the world. And it also immediately becomes tempting to run out and do all the things that you've been wanting to do. I got a haircut. One dose offers some protection. And now is the time to wait as much as you can. I know we've been saying that for over a year. Dr. Fauci said this week, it's kind of a race between the vaccine and the possibility that there'll be another surge. So the more Americans are patient about their return to normal life, he said, the less likely we are to see a fourth case spike. In a few more months, 75% of people will be fully vaccinated, not just 24%. And that's what we're aiming for. This Thursday in San Diego County, April 15th, everyone 16 and older will be eligible to get the vaccine. So if you need help finding an appointment or figuring out the computer systems, if you need help with transportation, anything, let me know and I will find someone to help. There are plenty of people in the congregation who would be happy to help others get their vaccine. And I hope everyone is also encouraging and offering help to your family members and friends, because we are all getting vaccinated. Please join in singing.
Sunset
Our closing words come from the Reverend Samuel Trumbore. Go forth in simplicity, find and walk the path that leads to compassion and wisdom, that leads to happiness, peace, and ease. Welcome the stranger and open your heart to a world in need of healing. Be courageous before the forces of hate. Hold and embody a vision of the common good that serves the needs of all people. Amen. You're invited to close our time together by singing the well. Everyone is invited to coffee hour. And as a reminder to our members, there is time at coffee hour for asking questions and hearing about our upcoming drive-by congregational meeting. So please come to coffee hour for that.